The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the private dining room of Billionaire. Marcus Caldwell smoothed his ivory silk tie and smiled at the nervous man across the table. The contract sat between them like a coiled snake. "Just a formality, Richard," Caldwell said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "Standard acquisition terms." Richard Chen's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. The document was dense, 15 pages of legal text. But something about the middle section looked strange. The words weren't English. "What's this language?" Richard asked, pointing. Caldwell chuckled. "Latin, old legal tradition. Adds gravitas, you know. My attorneys love their classical education." The waitress appeared at the table's edge. She was young, mid-20s, with deep brown skin and hair pulled into a neat bun. Her emerald green uniform was crisp, professional, invisible. Zara Williams had learned to move through these rooms like air. She set down 2 glasses of sparkling water. Her eyes caught the document. Just for a second. Then she straightened and turned to leave. "Fraudem consensus per obscuritatem linguae." The words fell from her lips like stones into still water. Perfect Latin. Ancient, formal, precise. Marcus Caldwell's pen stopped. Richard's head snapped up. The room temperature seemed to drop. "Excuse me?" Caldwell's voice had lost its warmth. Zara froze. She hadn't meant to speak aloud. The words had simply escaped, triggered by recognition, by horror at what she'd seen. "What did you just say?" Caldwell's eyes were ice now. Zara turned slowly. I apologize. I shouldn't have... Did you just speak Latin?" Richard interrupted, his face pale. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. 3 hours earlier, Zara had stood in her cramped studio apartment, staring at her reflection. The emerald green uniform fit perfectly. It always did. She'd worn it 4 nights a week for 2 years now. Her actual life lived in the corners of the room, stacks of academic journals on Roman legal systems. Her laptop opened to a half-finished dissertation chapter. A framed photo of her grandmother, stern and beautiful, beside a shelf of Latin texts. Zara Williams was 6 months from completing her PhD in classical languages, 6 months from becoming Dr. Williams. But PhDs didn't pay rent in this city, so she worked at Billionaire, where a single bottle of wine cost more than her monthly grocery budget. She'd learned the rhythm of the place. The tech billionaires in the West Wing, the politicians in the private booths, the old money families who'd been dining here since before she was born. They looked through her, not at her. She was part of the decor, like the crystal and the gold leaf ceiling. It used to bother her. Now she found it useful. People said things around her they'd never say if they remembered she was human. She'd heard confessions, conspiracies, cruelties spoken in casual tones between courses. Tonight she'd been assigned to the Constellation Room, the most exclusive space in the restaurant. Only high-profile reservations, only the wealthiest clients. She'd checked the booking, Marcus Caldwell. The name meant nothing to her then, just another rich man in a building full of them. Zara had tied her hair back, checked her appearance one final time, and headed out into the cold evening. The subway ride was crowded, anonymous. She'd reviewed Latin verb conjugations in her head, preparing for tomorrow's research session. She'd arrived at Billionaire at 5:30. The kitchen was already chaos, the dining room still empty and gleaming. Her manager, Thomas, had given her the usual speech about discretion and professionalism. She'd nodded, smiled, collected her order pad. By 7, the restaurant hummed with wealth. Zara moved between tables, efficient and invisible. She'd learned to anticipate needs before they were spoken, refill the water before the glass was empty, clear the appetizer plates the moment conversation shifted. The Constellation Room had been quiet until 8. Then Marcus Caldwell arrived with his guest. Zara had recognized the type immediately. Caldwell wore confidence like cologne, expensive and overwhelming. His companion looked anxious, overwhelmed. She'd served them wine, bread, the first course. They'd spoken in low voices about markets and opportunities and synergies. Business language, hollow and smooth. Then the contract appeared. And everything changed. Marcus Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying Zara with the intensity of a man accustomed to identifying threats. His cobalt blue suit was impeccable. His smile had vanished. "You understand Latin," he said. "Not a question. An accusation. Yes." Zara's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I study it." "Study it where?" "High school." His tone was patronizing, dismissive. "I'm completing my doctorate in classical languages." The words came out firmer than she intended. Pride overriding caution. Richard Chen looked between them, confused. What did she say? The Latin words. Caldwell's jaw tightened. Nothing. A mistake. It wasn't a mistake, Zara heard herself say. That clause states a fraud through consensus by obscurity of language. It means, I know what it means. Caldwell stood now, his 6-foot frame suddenly dominating the small room. And I know what you're trying to do. I'm not trying to do anything. You're attempting to sabotage a private business. Transaction based on a language you clearly don't understand as well as you think. His voice was cold, controlled. Latin is complex. A waitress with some college classes doesn't qualify as an expert. The condescension landed like a slap. Zara felt her face grow hard. I've spent 7 years studying legal Latin specifically. That clause is designed to... Enough. Caldwell turned to Richard. I apologize for the interruption. The staff here usually knows better than to eavesdrop on private conversations. Richard looked shaken. But Marcus, if there's something in the contract that... There's nothing. Caldwell's smile returned, sharp and dangerous. Our waitress here has misunderstood a standard legal phrase. It happens when people with limited education try to interpret specialized language. Zara's hands clenched around her order pad. The dismissal was complete. Not just of her translation, but of her existence as a thinking person. Richard, ignore this distraction, Caldwell continued. The contract has been reviewed by 3 law firms. Everything is perfectly legal and standard. But Richard's eyes had shifted. Doubt had entered the room like smoke under a door, Caldwell noticed. His expression hardened. I think we need a different server. Someone more professional. He pressed the call button on the table. Within seconds, Thomas appeared, his manager smile already in place. Is there a problem, Mr. Caldwell? Your waitress has been making inappropriate comments about private business documents. I'd like someone else, please. Thomas's eyes found Zara. She saw the calculation there. A billionaire's complaint versus a graduate student who served wine. The math was simple. Of course, Mr. Caldwell, my sincerest apologies. Zara returned to the main floor. Zara nodded stiffly. She turned to leave, but Richard's voice stopped her. Wait, what did the rest of it say? The Latin sections. Caldwell's hand slammed the table. Richard, for God's sake, I want to know. Richard's voice was quiet but firm. If there's Latin in my contract, I deserve to understand it. The silence stretched. Zara looked at Thomas, at Caldwell, at Richard's desperate face. She made a choice. The document contains multiple clauses that obscure ownership transfer terms. The Latin passages essentially allow the acquiring party to claim assets without full disclosure. It's a framework for legal theft. Caldwell's face went white, then red. That is slander. That is defamation. You have no idea what you're talking about. I can translate the entire document if you'd like, Zara said quietly. Get out, Caldwell hissed. Now. Thomas grabbed Zara's arm gently but firmly. Come on. Let's go. As she left the Constellation room, Zara heard Richard's voice shaking now. Marcus, I think I need my lawyer to review this again. And Caldwell's response, smooth as poison. Of course. Take all the time you need, but you're trusting a waitress over 3 law firms. Think about that, Richard. Really think about it. The kitchen was a furnace of noise and motion. Zara stood in the corner by the walk-in refrigerator, her hands pressed against the cool metal door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spoken. She'd actually spoken. Every instinct she'd developed over 2 years of invisible service had been overridden by that single moment of recognition. The contract had been so blatant, so arrogant in its deception, and Caldwell had dismissed her like she was nothing, like her 7 years of study meant less than his expensive suit and inherited confidence. The words echoed in her head. Limited education. A waitress with some college classes. Thomas appeared beside her, his face tight with controlled anger. What were you thinking? He was defrauding that man. The contract was... I don't care what the contract was. Thomas's voice was low, urgent. You don't speak to guests like that. You don't insert yourself into their private business ever. But it was illegal. I'm certain of it. You're certain. Thomas laughed, bitter and sharp. You're a part-time waitress, Zara. He's Marcus Caldwell. Do you know who that is? She shook her head. He owns Tech Vanguard Industries, worth about $12 billion. He dines here twice a month and spends more in a single night than you make in a year. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. And you just accused him of fraud in front of a potential business partner. The reality settled over her like cold water. She'd been right about the Latin. But right didn't matter when you were invisible. I need you to go home, Thomas said. Take tomorrow off too. Let this cool down. Am I fired? I don't know yet. Caldwell is still in there with Richard Chen. If he complains formally, I'll have to let you go. Corporate policy. Zara nodded numbly. She untied her apron, gathered her things from her locker, and slipped out the back entrance into the alley. The night air was sharp and cold. She walked to the subway in a daze, her mind replaying the scene over and over. The way Caldwell's eyes had gone cold. The way Richard had looked at her, desperate for truth but already doubting. On the subway, she stared at her reflection in the dark window. The emerald green uniform suddenly felt like a costume. Or a cage. Her grandmother's voice echoed from memory. They'll try to make you small, Zara. They'll try to convince you that your mind is less than theirs. Don't you believe it? Not for a second. She closed her eyes and breathed. The contract's Latin phrases scrolled through her mind, precise and damning. She hadn't misread it. She knew she hadn't. But knowing didn't matter if no one would listen. Zara's grandmother had been a librarian at Morningside Branch, a small public library in a forgotten corner of the city. As a child, Zara had spent every afternoon there after school, doing homework at the circulation desk while her grandmother sorted books. The library had been old even then, built in 1912 with marble columns and soaring ceilings. But the funding had dried up decades ago. The books were worn, some falling apart. Her grandmother treated them like sacred texts anyway. One summer day, when Zara was 12, she'd found her grandmother in the archive room, carefully repairing a Latin grammar textbook from 1887. The spine was broken, pages loose and yellowed. "Why are you fixing that?" Zara had asked. "Nobody reads Latin anymore." Her grandmother had looked at her with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Nobody with power wants you to read Latin anymore. There's a difference I don't understand. Latin is the language of law, medicine, religion, history. For centuries, if you couldn't read Latin, you couldn't understand the systems that controlled your life." Her grandmother had turned a page carefully. They used to keep people illiterate on purpose. Knowledge is power. They knew it then. They know it now. Zara had sat down beside her. "Teach me." And so it had begun. Every afternoon after homework, her grandmother would open the Latin texts and they'd work through declensions and conjugations together. It was their secret language, their private rebellion. "This isn't just about old words," her grandmother had said. "This is about refusing to be locked out. They think dead languages should stay dead, but nothing with power ever really dies." By high school, Zara was translating Cicero and Virgil. By college, she'd fallen in love with legal Latin, the precise language of contracts and statutes. She'd seen how words could be weapons or shields, how the right phrase could change everything. Her grandmother had died during Zara's second year of graduate school. Sudden. a stroke in the library where she'd spent 50 years. Zara had found her among the stacks, a book on Roman law open in her lap. The PhD had become a promise then, Dr. Williams, the title her grandmother never had the chance to earn. Knowledge as resistance, education as armor. But armor didn't pay rent, so Zara had taken the job at Billionaire, telling herself it was temporary. Just until she finished. Just until she could step into the academic world where her knowledge mattered. Tonight had shown her the truth. Her knowledge only mattered in spaces that allowed her to speak. And those spaces were fewer than she'd imagined. She thought of the contract, of the elegant Latin phrases designed to deceive. Her grandmother would have known exactly what to do. She would have spoken up, consequences be damned. Zara had inherited that same stubborn courage, and that same devastating idealism. She reached her apartment at 11. The building was quiet, most residents already asleep. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, unlocked her door, and stood in the doorway looking at her life. The Latin texts, the research notes, the half-finished dissertation that would make her an expert in a language the world had dismissed as dead. Her phone buzzed. "A text from Thomas," Caldwell complained. "You're suspended pending review, sorry." Zara sank onto her bed, the phone still glowing in her hand. She'd spoken truth and been punished for it. The equation was simple, brutal, familiar, but something in her refused to accept it. The contract was still out there. Richard Chen would sign it, unaware of what he was agreeing to. And Caldwell would add another victory to his collection of deceits, unless someone stopped him. Unless the truth found a way to speak louder, Zara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed watching the ceiling, her mind circling the contract like a shark around wounded prey. At 2 in the morning she gave up and opened her laptop. She needed to see it again, to be certain. The Latin had been clear, but Caldwell's confidence had planted doubt. What if she'd misread? What if her translation was wrong? No, she trusted her training. But trust wasn't enough. She needed proof. Her phone contained the answer. When she'd set down the water glasses, she'd placed her phone on the table for just a moment. Face down, camera angled up. It had been instinct, not planning. Her habit from her research. Always capture primary sources when possible. She opened her photo gallery. Scrolled back. There, the contract. 3 photos, slightly blurred but readable. The Latin sections were visible. Clear enough to analyze. Zara's heart began to race. She opened her translation software and her personal database of legal Latin phrases. Then she began to work. The first clause was exactly as she remembered. Fraudum consensus per obscuritatem linguae. Fraud through consensus by obscurity of language. It established the document's purpose, hiding terms in plain sight. The second clause was worse. Transfero dominium sine plenam revelationem. Transfer of ownership without full revelation. It allowed Caldwell's company to assume control of assets, without disclosing which specific assets. The third clause made her stomach drop. Obligatio in perpetuum revocatio impossibilis. Perpetual obligation, revocation impossible. Once Richard signed, he couldn't back out. Ever. Zara sat back, her hands trembling. This wasn't just unethical business practice. This was systematic fraud, legally structured to avoid detection. The Latin wasn't decoration. It was camouflage. She spent 2 hours documenting everything. Screenshots, translations, parallel examples from Roman contract law. She built a case file that would hold up in any academic setting. But would it hold up in court? Would it even get that far? At 4 in the morning, she made a decision. She couldn't let this disappear, even if it cost her everything. She opened her email and began searching for investigative journalists. She found one, Daniel Torres, who'd written exposés on tech industry corruption. His articles were thorough, well-researched, respected. She drafted an email. Professional, clear evidence attached. She explained who she was, what she'd witnessed, what the contract actually said. She included her academic credentials, her research background, the translation documents. Before she could second-guess herself, She hit send. The sun was rising when Zara finally closed her laptop. Exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind buzzed with nervous energy. She'd done something. Maybe it wouldn't matter. Maybe no one would care that a waitress had decoded a billionaire's secret fraud. But her grandmother's voice echoed again. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. Zara showered, dressed, made coffee. At 8:30 her phone rang. Unknown number, is this Zara Williams? A man's voice, hurried and professional. Yes, Daniel Torres, investigative journalist. I got your email about the Caldwell contract. Zara's breath caught. You did? This is... If what you're saying is accurate, this is explosive, and can we meet? I need to verify your credentials, review the evidence, understand exactly what you witnessed. Yes, of course. When? Today, this afternoon. There's a coffee shop on Lexington and 47th. 3 o'clock. I'll be there. And Ms. Williams, don't share this with anyone else. If Caldwell finds out you're talking to press, he'll bury this before it ever sees daylight. The line went dead. Zara stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her chest, hope and terror warring in her stomach. She'd lit a fuse. Now she had to wait to see what exploded. The coffee shop was generic, crowded, anonymous. Perfect for a conversation you didn't want witnessed. Zara arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner. Her laptop bag sat at her feet, heavy with evidence. Daniel Torres arrived exactly at 3. He was 40-ish, wearing a wrinkled shirt and carrying a worn leather messenger bag. His eyes were sharp, tired, constantly scanning. Zara Williams? He offered his hand. Yes, thank you for meeting me. They ordered coffee. Small talk while they waited. Neutral topics, weather and traffic. But tension hummed beneath it. When the barista delivered their drinks, Daniel leaned forward. Show me everything. Zara opened her laptop. She walked him through the photos, the translations, the legal precedents. She explained her academic background, showed him her university credentials, her published research on Renaissance legal Latin. Daniel took notes rapidly, asked sharp questions. How was the lighting? Could she guarantee the photos weren't edited? Had anyone else seen this? 20 minutes in, his expression shifted, from skeptical to intrigue to something like excitement. This is real, he said quietly. You actually caught Marcus Caldwell using archaic Latin to hide fraud clauses in a contract. Yes, and you're certain about the translations? No possibility of misinterpretation? None. The language is deliberately archaic, but the meaning is unambiguous. Those clauses are designed to deceive. Daniel sat back, running a hand through his hair. This could be huge. Caldwell's been suspected of shady acquisitions for years, but nothing's ever stuck. This could be the thread that unravels everything. Hope bloomed in Zara's chest. So you're right about it. I have to verify a few things first. Contact some legal experts. Confirm the translation independently. But yes, if this holds up, I'm publishing it. How long will that take? A week, maybe 2. I need to be careful. Caldwell has lawyers who specialize in killing stories before they run. Daniel closed his notebook. But this is solid. You did good work here. The validation felt like sunlight after weeks of rain. Someone believed her. Someone with power to amplify truth. They parted with a handshake and an agreement to stay in contact. Zara walked home feeling lighter than she had in days. Justice wasn't just possible, it was coming. 1 week later, the article published. Zara saw it online at 6 in the morning, her hands shaking as she clicked the link. Tech billionaires' questionable contract language raises ethics questions. She read quickly. Excitement building. Then confusion. Then cold disappointment. The article was vague, cautious, stripped of teeth. It mentioned unusual legal terminology and questions about transparency, but never used the word fraud. Never mentioned Latin specifically. Never explained what the clauses actually meant, and it credited anonymous industry sources. Zara's name appeared nowhere. She called Daniel immediately. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice defensive before she even spoke. "I know," he said. "I know it's not what we discussed. You gutted it. Everything I showed you, my editor killed the stronger version. Said we didn't have enough corroboration, and legal was terrified of Caldwell's lawyers. But the evidence from a waitress isn't enough for them. I'm sorry. I tried to fight for it, but—" He sighed. "Look, you did the right thing bringing this to me. Maybe it'll lead somewhere eventually. And what about Richard Chen? That man is still being defrauded. I don't know what to tell you. I published what I could." Zara ended the call. She stared at the anemic article on her screen. Rage building like a storm. She'd been erased again. Her knowledge reduced to anonymous sources. Her evidence dismissed because of who she was, not what she knew. By noon, Caldwell's team had released a statement calling the article "baseless speculation by tabloid journalists." By evening, the story had disappeared from the news cycle entirely. Zara sat in her apartment, watching the truth die in real time. And somewhere across the city, Marcus Caldwell was probably smiling. The knock came 3 days later. Sharp, official, insistent. Zara opened the door to find 2 men in expensive suits holding a manila folder. "Zara Williams." "Yes, you've been served." The taller one handed her the folder. "Cease and desist order from Caldwell Industries. You're being sued for defamation, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information." The words hit like physical blows. "I didn't steal anything. You photographed a private legal document without permission and shared it with media. That's theft. The lawsuit details are in the folder. You'll want to get a lawyer. A good one." They left her standing in the doorway, the folder heavy in her hands. She opened it with numb fingers. The lawsuit was 40 pages. It accused her of everything. Lying about her credentials, fabricating translations, deliberately attempting to sabotage a legitimate business transaction. It demanded $5 million in damages. $5 million. A number that might as well have been 5 billion for someone living paycheck to paycheck. Her phone rang. "Thomas from Billionaire." "Zara, I'm sorry. Corporate got word of the lawsuit. I have to let you go officially. It's policy when legal action is involved. I understand." Her voice sounded distant, not her own. "For what it's worth, I believe you. But belief doesn't pay the bills." She ended the call. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, walls closing in. Her phone buzzed again. A text from her landlord. "Received a noise complaint about your unit. Also concerned about recent publicity. Need to discuss lease renewal." Then her email pinged. Her university address. She opened it with dread already forming. From Dr. Patricia Holbrook, department chair, subject. "Urgent meeting required, Zara. I need to see you immediately regarding recent events. Your status in the program may be affected by pending legal issues. Please come to my office tomorrow at 9 a.m. The walls were closing in from every direction. Job gone, home threatened. Academic future in question. And all because she'd spoken a truth that a billionaire wanted buried. Zara sank onto her bed, the lawsuit folder beside her. Through the window, the city glittered with indifferent light. Somewhere out there, Marcus Caldwell was destroying her methodically, professionally, completely. Her phone rang one more time. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Zara Williams?" A woman's voice, older, authoritative. "Yes, my name is Professor Catherine Ellison. I taught you Latin your first semester at the university. I need to talk to you about Marcus Caldwell's contract. Can we meet?" Zara's breath caught. "How did you—" "I still have contacts in the legal community. I heard about what happened, and I believe I can help." "I don't understand. That contract you translated?" "I've seen something like it before. 20 years ago. Different billionaire, same playbook." Professor Ellison's voice hardened. "We need to talk tomorrow before you meet with Dr. Holbrook." "Okay, where?" "The Morningside Library. 10 o'clock. There's something there you need to see." The line went dead. Zara sat in the growing darkness. Hope and despair tangled like barbed wire in her chest. The library, her grandmother's library, where everything had started, maybe where everything would end. Zara sat in her apartment that night surrounded by paper. The lawsuit, the eviction warning, the email from her department chair. Each document was a wall closing in. Her phone lay silent on the table. She'd called 3 friends earlier. 2 hadn't answered. The third had been awkward, distant. I heard about the Caldwell thing. Maybe we should talk when it all blows over. Translation, don't drag me into your disaster. The city hummed beyond her window, indifferent to her collapsing world. She thought about calling her mother, but what could she say? I'm being sued for $5 million for telling the truth. Her mother would panic. Worse, she'd blame Zara for speaking up. Maybe everyone was right. Maybe silence was survival. Maybe invisible people should stay invisible. She picked up the framed photo of her grandmother. The stern face, the knowing eyes. Zara remembered sitting in that library archive room, learning Latin while her grandmother repaired. Ancient books nobody else valued. Truth doesn't need permission to exist, but truth without power was just noise. Zara set the photo down and opened her laptop. The contract photos were still there, clear and damning. She knew what they said. She knew what they meant. But knowing wasn't enough when the world refused to listen. Her email pinged. Another message, this time from a law firm offering to represent her, for a retainer she couldn't afford. She closed the laptop. The apartment felt smaller than ever. She lay on her bed and stared at the ceiling, exhaustion pulling at her but sleep impossible. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Caldwell was sleeping soundly in a penthouse, her life just another problem solved by lawyers and money. The silence pressed down like water. She thought about quitting, disappearing, letting it all go. Then she remembered Professor Ellison's call. The Morningside Library. 10 o'clock. Something she needed to see, one last thread, one last possibility. Zara closed her eyes and held onto it like a lifeline. The Morningside Library looked smaller than Zara remembered. The marble columns were still grand, but the building itself seemed tired, worn by decades of neglect. She climbed the steps at 9:50, her heart heavy with memory. Professor Ellison waited in the archive room, the same room where Zara's grandmother had worked. The old woman stood beside a research table covered in files and ancient texts. Her silver hair was pulled back, her expression sharp and focused. "Zara, thank you for coming." Professor Ellison gestured to the table. "Sit, we don't have much time." Zara sat, her eyes scanning the documents. Legal texts, court records, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. 23 years ago, Professor Ellison began, a real estate developer named Harrison Vance used the exact same technique as Caldwell, archaic Latin in contracts to hide fraud clauses. He stole millions from investors before anyone caught on. What happened to him? He went to prison, but only because someone translated the contracts and took them to federal prosecutors. Someone who understood Renaissance legal Latin. Professor Ellison's eyes met Zara's. "Someone like you." Zara leaned forward. "Who?" "Me. I was younger then, just starting my career. Vance's lawyers tried to bury me the same way Caldwell's trying to bury you. Lawsuits, threats, intimidation." She smiled grimly. "But I had something he didn't count on. A prosecutor who specialized in financial fraud and actually valued expertise over appearances. Does that prosecutor still practice?" "She does. Federal level now. And when I told her about your situation, she was very interested." Professor Ellison pulled out a business card. "Miranda Reeves, Assistant U.S. Attorney. She's expecting your call." Zara took the card with trembling hands. "Why would she help me?" "The journalist barely believed me. The university is questioning my status. I'm nobody. You're not nobody. You're a scholar who witnessed a crime and had the courage to speak up. That matters to Miranda. She's built her career on taking down financial predators who hide behind complexity." Professor Ellison tapped the files. "And I can testify about the Vance case. Show the pattern. Prove this isn't isolated." Hope flickered in Zara's chest, fragile but real. "What do I need to do?" "Call her today." Bring everything, the photos, your translations, your credentials. She'll need to verify it all, but if it's as solid as I think it is, she can move forward with an investigation. Caldwell's lawyers will fight this. Of course they will. But federal prosecutors have more power than journalists or university committees. And Miranda doesn't scare easily. Professor Ellison squeezed Zara's hand. Your grandmother would be proud of you. She taught you Latin not just as a language, but as a weapon against people who used knowledge to oppress. Use it. Zara left the library at 11 with the business card clutched in her hand and purpose burning in her chest. She called Miranda Reeves from the steps. Miss Williams, the prosecutor answered immediately. Professor Ellison told me about your situation. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Yes, absolutely. Bring everything. Photos, translations, documentation. I want to see it all. At 2 o'clock, Zara sat across from Miranda Reeves in a federal building downtown. The prosecutor was 45, black with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. Zara laid out her evidence. Every photo, every translation, every parallel precedent from Roman law. She explained her academic background, her research focus, the moment she'd heard the Latin and understood what it meant. Miranda asked questions for 90 minutes, precise, probing, relentless. Then she sat back and smiled. This is prosecutable. More than that, it's a gift. Caldwell's been on our radar for years, but he's careful. This is the first real evidence of fraud we've seen. She tapped the contract photos. I'll need you to testify. Can you do that? Yes. His lawyers will tear into you. They'll question your credentials, your motives, your character. It won't be pleasant. I don't care. He needs to be stopped. Miranda's smile widened. Then let's stop him. The federal courtroom was all dark wood and cold authority. Zara sat in the witness box, her hands folded in her lap, her emerald green dress a deliberate choice, the same color as her waitress uniform. A reminder of where this started. Marcus Caldwell sat at the defense table in an ivory suit, his expression calm and confident. His legal team surrounded him like armor, 5 lawyers, each more expensive than the last. The prosecution's case had taken 2 days. Financial experts, contract analysts, witnesses to other questionable Caldwell deals. But Zara was the keystone, the person who decoded the Latin and understood its meaning. Miranda Reeves approached the witness stand. Ms. Williams, please state your credentials for the court. Zara spoke clearly. I'm a doctoral candidate in classical languages at the university, specializing in Renaissance legal Latin. I've published 3 papers on Roman contract law, and I'm fluent in both classical and medieval Latin. And on the night of October 15th, what did you observe at Billionaire restaurant? I was serving Marcus Caldwell and Richard Chen when I saw a contract between them. Multiple sections were written in archaic Latin. I recognized immediately that the language was designed to obscure meaning. Objection, Caldwell's lead attorney stood. The witness is a waitress, not a certified translator. Miranda didn't miss a beat. The witness holds a master's degree in classical languages and is completing a doctorate. She's more qualified than most certified translators for Renaissance legal Latin. The judge nodded. Overruled. Continue. Zara explained what she'd seen. The specific clauses, their literal translations, their legal implications. She cited precedents from Roman law, showed how the language paralleled known fraud structures from the 1500s. Caldwell's attorney cross-examined aggressively. Ms. Williams, isn't it true you were suspended from your job for unprofessional conduct? I was suspended for speaking truth that made a powerful man uncomfortable. You photographed a private document without permission. Isn't that theft? I documented evidence of a crime. A crime according to you, a part-time waitress with no legal training. Miranda objected. Your Honor, Ms. Williams's expertise has been established. The defense is badgering. Sustained. Move on, counselor. But Caldwell's lawyer wasn't finished. Ms. Williams, Have you ever been paid by any media outlets for your story? No. Do you have any financial motivation to lie about Mr. Caldwell? I have 5 million reasons not to lie, actually. Your client is suing me for that amount. If I'm lying, I lose everything. A ripple of reaction through the courtroom. Caldwell's expression flickered, just for a second. Annoyance breaking through confidence. Miranda returned for redirect. Ms. Williams, I'm going to show you the contract in question. Can you translate this section for the court? She pointed to the first Latin clause. Zara read it aloud, first in Latin, then in English. Fraudum consensus per obscuritatem linguae. Fraud through consensus by obscurity of language. It establishes the document's purpose, hiding terms in plain sight, so the signing party can't understand what they're agreeing to. She translated clause after clause. The courtroom grew silent as the pattern emerged. Each translation revealed another layer of deception. Each phrase showed systematic, calculated fraud. When she finished, Miranda asked one final question. Ms. Williams, in your expert opinion as a scholar of legal Latin, was this contract designed to deceive? Yes, unquestionably. Every Latin phrase serves that purpose. Thank you. No further questions. The judge called for closing arguments. Miranda stood and addressed the jury with controlled passion. Marcus Caldwell believed he could hide fraud behind a dead language. He counted on no one understanding, no one caring enough to look closely. But Zara Williams understood. She cared, and because of her courage, we can see this contract for what it really is, a weapon disguised as a business agreement. Caldwell's attorney argued procedure, technicality, reasonable doubt. But the evidence was clear. The translations were irrefutable. The pattern undeniable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. Caldwell's face went pale. His lawyers began immediate conversations about appeals. But the damage was done. The truth had won. Zara sat in the gallery, her hands shaking with relief and exhaustion. Miranda squeezed her shoulder. You did it. You brought down a billionaire with a dead language. Not dead, Zara whispered. Just waiting for the right moment to speak. The news broke like a storm. Tech billionaire convicted on fraud charges. Waitress's Latin translation key evidence. The headlines were everywhere, impossible to ignore. Zara's phone rang constantly for 3 days. Interview requests, book deals, job offers. She ignored most of them. Some stories didn't need amplification. They needed to be lived. Caldwell Industries collapsed within a week. Investors fled. Partners dissolved agreements. The stock price cratered. Richard Chen came forward with other victims. A dozen people who'd signed similar contracts, all deceived by Latin they couldn't read. The federal investigation expanded. More charges filed. More victims identified. Caldwell's empire, built on linguistic deception, crumbled to dust. Zara returned to the university 3 weeks after the verdict. Dr. Holbrook met her in the hallway outside her office, face tight with something like shame. Ms. Williams, I owe you an apology. You were protecting the department. I understand. No, I was protecting myself. I doubted you because it was easier than standing up to power. That was wrong. Dr. Holbrook handed her an envelope. Your suspension is lifted. Your scholarship is reinstated. And the department would like to offer you a teaching fellowship for next semester. Zara took the envelope. Emotions tangled in her throat. Thank you. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. You're very much like her. Later that day, Zara walked to the Morningside Library. It looked different somehow, less worn, more enduring. Or maybe she was seeing it differently. Professor Ellison was in the archive room again, cataloging texts. She smiled when Zara entered. I heard the news. Congratulations. I couldn't have done it without you. You did the hard part. I just showed you the path. Professor Ellison gestured to the Latin text surrounding them. What will you do now? Zara ran her fingers along the spines of the ancient books, feeling the embossed letters under her fingertips. finish my dissertation, teach, make sure the next generation understands that knowledge isn't just power, it's responsibility. Your grandmother would be proud. She'd say I was just getting started. That night, Zara sat in her apartment, the eviction notice now rescinded, the lawsuit dismissed, and opened her dissertation file. The title stared back at her, Legal Latin as Weapon and Shield Renaissance Contract Language in Modern Corporate Fraud. She'd lived her research. Now she'd write it. Outside her window, the city glittered with possibility. Somewhere out there, other Marcus Caldwells were hiding their deceptions behind complexity and language barriers. Other people were being silenced for speaking truth. But somewhere out there were also people like her grandmother. People who refused to let knowledge be locked away. People who believed that dead languages could still speak. If someone cared enough to listen, Zara began typing, her grandmother's voice echoing with every keystroke. Truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. 6 months later, Zara stood at the front of a university lecture hall, facing 40 students on the first day of her new class, Introduction to Legal Latin. The students were diverse, different backgrounds, different dreams, different reasons for being there. Some looked eager, some looked skeptical. One young black woman in the third row reminded Zara of herself at that age. Latin is called a dead language, Zara began, but nothing with power ever really dies. It just waits. For centuries, Latin was the language of law, medicine, religion, governance. If you couldn't read it, you couldn't access the systems that controlled your life. That was intentional. She pulled up a slide showing a contract, simple English on the left, complex Latin on the right. People in power have always used language as a weapon, complexity as camouflage. They hide truth behind words most people don't understand, then claim ignorance is the reader's fault. Zara's eyes found the young woman in the third row. But ignorance isn't a character flaw. It's often a choice someone else made for you. She told them about Billionaire, about the contract, about speaking up and being dismissed and fighting anyway. She showed them the exact Latin phrases that had brought down a billionaire's empire. You're here to learn Latin, Zara said. But more than that, you're here to learn that knowledge is resistance. Every word you decode, every text you translate, every system you demystify, that's power returning to people it was stolen from. The young woman in the third row raised her hand. What if we speak up and nobody listens? Zara smiled, sad and knowing. Then you speak louder. You speak smarter. You speak until the world has no choice but to hear you. And if they try to silence you, you remember something important. She pulled up a final slide, a photo of her grandmother in the Morningside Library, surrounded by Latin texts, eyes fierce and proud. Truth doesn't need their permission to exist. It only needs your voice. The class sat in silence for a moment. Then the young woman in the third row smiled, small but determined. Zara recognized that look. She'd worn it herself once. After class, the student approached her desk. Professor Williams, I'm Maya. I'm a waitress too, at night while I'm going to school. Then you already understand what I'm teaching, Zara said. I do, but I want to understand it better. Maya's eyes held that same stubborn courage Zara knew so well. I want to learn to speak so loud they can't ignore me. Zara thought of her grandmother, of Professor Ellison, of the chain of knowledge passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Of voices refusing to be silenced. Then let's begin, she said. Outside the window, autumn leaves fell like golden confetti. The city moved forward, indifferent and eternal. But in that classroom, something shifted. Seeds planted, power redistributed, truth given a voice. And somewhere in libraries and lecture halls and quiet corners where people gathered to learn, the so-called dead language lived on. Not as a relic, but as a weapon. Not as decoration, but as revolution. Waiting for the next person brave enough to speak.